I'm an American who spent 14 months living in the Netherlands, and I experienced quite a bit of Dutch culture shocks along the way, with one of those culture shocks being the size of the cars. You see, where I grew up in Texas, the most popular car is the Ford F-150, and if you don't believe me, believe Google. As you can see, the Ford F-150 is consistently the highest selling vehicle in Texas. So seeing that everyone in the Netherlands was driving Fiats and Toyota Aygos definitely threw me for a loop. But as I spent more time in the Netherlands and traveled around Europe and Southeast Asia, what I eventually came to realize was that the Netherlands isn't the exception. The US is the exception. Most people in most places drive smaller cars. But the Dutch take things a step further than any other place I've been to with the use of the microcar. Bearing that in mind, in this video, we will be reacting to a video from Not Just Bikes about the miniature microcars of Amsterdam.
My videos show a lot of street scenes in Amsterdam, so I often get comments from people in other countries saying, "Whoa, wait a second. What the heck is that?" That is a microcar, and they're remarkably common here in Amsterdam.
So he says that they're remarkably common in Amsterdam, but I never actually visited Amsterdam when I was in the Netherlands, other than I think for around 20 minutes when I first arrived. I spent most of my time in the suburbs and or the countrysides of Brabant and Gelderland. So rest assured that I didn't really see a whole lot of these where I was, but I did visit Utrecht and I did visit Haarlem, and that's where I saw the vast majority of these, along with maybe a few in Den Bosch and Tilburg.
There are several different types of microcar in the Netherlands, but I'll focus here on the two I see most often. The most common is probably the Kanta, which is a Dutch vehicle, first produced in 1995. The Kanta is interesting because it has a special classification in the Netherlands as a handicap vehicle, kind of like a gas-powered covered mobility scooter. Because of its special classification, the Kanta is permitted to ride in the bicycle lanes and park on the sidewalks.
I think these only go up to 30 kilometers an hour or something like that, right? 30, maybe 40 at the absolute most. I wonder if anybody's taken the liberty of tuning one of these to go faster than that. I'm sure at least one person in the history of the Netherlands has taken on that challenge and succeeded.
Here's an example of a designated parking spot for a Kanta, marked with white pavers. I most often see them driven by elderly people, but there's an ongoing challenge of enforcement to prevent them from being driven by able-bodied people, taking advantage of their special status. Today the Kanta comes in several varieties. To me, the most interesting is this one, where the seat has been removed completely, allowing a wheelchair user to ride right inside.
Okay, that's really nice, because just now I was wondering, if somebody is disabled, because that's who this car is made for, how would that person be able to load their wheelchair into the back of the car, where I'm assuming it would go, and then somehow get out and walk around the side to get in the actual driving part of the car? I didn't really understand how that would work. This right here is super convenient for wheelchair-bound people.
The typical gasoline Kanta costs about 14,000 euros new, but there are sometimes subsidies available. The Amsterdam municipality owns several Kantas that are made available to residents with limited mobility. So the Kanta is really a vehicle for people with disabilities, and they're not available or even desirable to most people.
Wait a minute. Is this one of those things that prevents people from stealing the car? Because if that's the case, are you really going to tell me that people are stealing these? I know people steal bikes in the Netherlands, but I'm not going to lie. If you steal a disabled person's car, you are a special kind of evil.
For people with disabilities, and they're not available or even desirable to most people. That is very different from the Bureau, which is jokingly called the Kanta for famous people. The Bureau is an Italian-designed electric microcar. It starts at about 15,000 euros and is mostly...
Wait a minute.
Seen in wealthy neighborhoods as a second car for the family. It's at about 50.
This interior looks really nice. Now look, for context, I've driven some nice cars in my day. I've driven BMWs, Teslas. I know it's kind of arguable if those are nice or not, but I've driven a Porsche. I've driven Mercedes-Benzes, multiple of them. This is one of the nicest interiors, at least based on the seats, that I've ever seen. Let me know if you've driven one, if you think that the interior is as comfortable as it looks.
15,000 euros and is mostly seen in wealthy neighborhoods as a second car for the family or as a corporate car, usually for real estate agents. I bet about half the bureaus in the whole of the Netherlands are registered in this one wealthy area in Amsterdam. But the other common vehicle in this neighborhood is the Range Rover, so I'm happy whenever someone chooses a bureau instead.
So, if you have money in the Netherlands, I always wondered what the status symbols were in the Netherlands for wealthy people. Because I feel like no matter how frugal a society is, there are always going to be those identifying factors. I guess this is one of the identifying factors. You have either one of these or a Range Rover.
So how small is a bureau? My first car in 2005 was a Smart 42. I was living in Canada at the time, and I remember how small the car seemed next to all the monstrous Canadian vehicles. And that was before the current fetish with large SUVs and pickup trucks in North America. But here's the size of a Smart 42.
So, to his point, these smart cars are very, very small by, I guess, not just US standards, but North American standards. So I guess Canada is maybe another exception to the rule about smaller cars, but I do vividly remember a few times when I would be in a parking lot in the US, and of course the parking spots there are meant to cater to the American-sized vehicles. And I would think I found a really, really good parking spot. And I would pull up to the spot and there would be a smart car hidden in the front end of that spot, and I would be so heated. But honestly, this is a lot bigger than that microcar. So that really puts into perspective how small those are.
Compared to a bureau. Of course, microcars also look small because we're used to much larger vehicles. But it wasn't that long ago that some cars were this size. Now, watch a modern Mini Cooper drive by as a comparison.
Wow.
But despite its small size, the introduction of the bureau has caused a lot of controversy. And because Amsterdam is more microcars than any other city,
Wait a minute.
has caused a lot of controversy.
Is that how Canadians pronounce controversy? Controversy? If you're Dutch, how would you pronounce this word right here? Would you pronounce it more like the Americans or the Canadians? I didn't know that they pronounced that differently than we did.
And because Amsterdam is more microcars than any other city in the Netherlands, they're dealing with these problems first. The Canto was generally accepted because it was a vehicle for disabled people, but the Bureau is different. Bureau drivers have taken advantage of rules that were designed for Cantos, so a judge ruled last year that a Bureau is not a handicap vehicle. That means that the Bureau will need a license plate, the driver will need a driver's license, it will no longer be allowed in bicycle lanes, and it will need to be parked in a legal parking spot, just like any other car.
But how do they determine what makes that different than the other one for the disabled people? Does it go faster or does it take up more space? It doesn't seem like it takes up any more space, so what would the difference be? I guess it's just for consumers in general versus being specifically for disabled people?
Though there are still some exceptions for disabled people. Still, it's better for the city, in many ways, if people are driving electric microcars rather than conventional cars. So Amsterdam is looking at ways to promote microcars as a viable alternative. The new rules allow Bureau owners to buy a citywide parking pass, allowing them to park in any car parking spot in the city for a yearly flat rate fee. It'll be interesting to see if this provides enough incentive for people to buy a Bureau instead of a conventional car. In the future, I'd like to rent a Bureau and do a more in-depth review. Let me know if you'd be interested in that in the comments.
I'm not gonna lie, I like the idea of having one of these, but for 15,000 euros, I don't know if that's worth it to me. I feel like, especially in the Netherlands, and mind you, again, I was staying in the countryside, I was able to get around solely with a bicycle. And if I wanted to get to a bigger city, I would just take the bicycle to the bus stop and then take the bus to where I was trying to go. I'm saying this to say that this kind of just doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion, for 15,000 euros, especially if you can get a Bakfiets for probably a tenth of that price, or maybe even less. Let me know in the comments how much a Bakfiets would cost. Maybe an electric Bakfiets, if that's even a thing, would be a better deal than this.
I find the objections to microcars in Amsterdam to be very interesting because they mirror the problems other cities face with vehicles that are a square peg in a round hole. In some cities, e-scooters are the square peg vehicle, clogging up the sidewalks and too dangerous to ride on the road. But in many cities, the square peg vehicle is the bicycle. There's nowhere to park them, so people lock them to trees and fences. They're too fast to ride on the sidewalk, but too slow to go on the road. And of course, the dangers caused by cars make them infeasible for most people.
Yeah, he raises a really good point. I remember when I made a video showing what cycling in the US, especially in a place like Dallas, which is exceedingly car-centric, even by American standards, is actually like, I saw a few comments of people saying that I should have rode in the street because I was putting pedestrians at risk. And what you have to understand is that physics is a thing. And a bicycle running into a pedestrian does much less harm to that pedestrian than a car running into a bicycle does to the person riding the bicycle. And in the US, where you have higher traffic speeds and you have bigger vehicles like this right here, Ford F-150, generally, if you're riding a bike, you want to be riding on the sidewalk.
In the Netherlands, of course, the bicycle is not a square peg vehicle. It's a fully accepted and integrated method of transportation that is taken into consideration when designing the street. So, what might a city look like if it were designed with microcars in mind? Well, there actually is a city like that, Peachtree City, Georgia. It's a city that was designed from the start with a conventional road network, but also with a parallel road network entirely designed for golf carts. For example, here's a picture of one of their high school parking lots.
Okay, I've never seen Peachtree City, Georgia before. I've been to Atlanta very briefly. I didn't know this was a thing. I always took Georgia to be a very, very car-centric place, right in that same realm as Dallas or Texas in general. This is mind-blowing to me. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this anywhere else in the US. All these golf carts. My high school parking lot most certainly did not look like this. It was just cars.
And here's a picture of the Walmart parking lot.
Wow.
If you'd like to find out more, Tom Scott did a great video about Peachtree City that I'll link to below.
That is a lot of golf carts.
Unfortunately, a microcar would be too dangerous to drive in most of North America. The only reason they're feasible in the Netherlands is because there are enough slow, traffic-calm streets in most built-up areas. Over the years, car companies have added more luxuries and safety features, increasing the size and weight of their vehicles. But while these features have made cars much safer for drivers and their passengers, the added weight and size has made them much more dangerous to pedestrians, cyclists, and people in smaller cars. These safety features are almost only necessary at high speeds, too. Even airbags are unlikely to deploy in crashes on 30km/h streets. And, of course, heavier cars are much less fuel efficient than lighter vehicles, regardless of how they're powered. I think it's worth thinking about how we want our cities to be.
It's funny that he brought up the Range Rover because that is a very big status symbol car in the US as well. And a big part of the reason why, let me actually put you on some game that you might not know about. A big part of the reason why a lot of wealthy people in the US drive SUVs, so Range Rovers, Rolls-Royce Cullinans, Tesla Model X's, Mercedes G-Wagons, cars of that size, is because you're actually incentivized for doing so by the tax authorities. Basically, there's this tax deduction or expense. I don't really know how you would categorize it, but essentially, if you run a business, what a lot of people do is they will purchase a car that is more than 6,000 pounds, and that is pounds of weight, more than 6,000 pounds, and they will write off the cost of that car for that year. The tax loophole, I guess you can call it, was actually intended for farmers with their heavy machinery, tractors and whatnot. But nowadays, because cars have ballooned as much as they have weight-wise, you do see people in Los Angeles, for example, driving G-Wagons simply because it's more economically advantageous for them. I mean, they're still actually paying that amount of money that they're paying for the car, but when you reach a certain level of wealth, it might make more sense to actually get that car than to pay the taxes that you'd otherwise pay for not having that car, especially if buying that car takes you into a lower tax bracket.
Do we really want everybody in 2 tons of metal in our city centers? Do we want them in cars at all, micro or not? At the very least, I believe our city should be safe enough to drive a microcar, because if you're not safe in a little metal box, then you're definitely not safe outside of a metal box. Of course, some large vehicles will always be needed, but it's worth asking how many of the vehicles in our cities could be downsized. In the Netherlands, it's already common to see a range of light electric.
You know what? It's interesting because it wasn't until I came to Southeast Asia that I started seeing very small utility vehicles or cargo vehicles, whatever you'd want to call them. Basically garbage trucks, trucks that are for the municipality, so on and so forth, construction vehicles. They tend to be a lot smaller here in Asia, and that's something that I think a lot of the rest of the world can definitely mimic.
Vehicles used for commercial purposes. And commercial electric cargo bikes are common as well. Ultimately, people and businesses should have a range of transportation options available to them, and cities should be encouraging those vehicles that have the lowest negative impact. So I think that in the modern city, electric microcars have their place. They're expensive today, but they'll come down in price. Kind of like how Tesla started by selling insanely overpriced cars for rich people, and now they sell regular overpriced cars for rich people. Microcars are a convenient way of getting around a busy city that's sheltered from the elements, easy to park, and a great alternative for people with mobility issues. And while they probably shouldn't be in bicycle lanes and on sidewalks, they're generally much less objectionable than a regular car, at least to people walking and cycling. I would love it if everyone in the city could walk, cycle, or take public transit. But if someone is going to drive, I definitely prefer it if they drive a microcar. Because as far as I'm concerned, the fewer large vehicles we have on our streets, the better.
I agree 100%. And I actually have an interesting idea. I don't know if maybe any Dutch cities have already tried this, but I think somewhere in the Netherlands, they should experiment with not allowing conventional vehicles within a certain district at all. So within maybe the city center, you're not allowed to drive a regular car and you have to drive a micro vehicle. But of course, you're not going to make everyone pay 15,000 euros to purchase one. Instead, what you'll do is you'll have somewhat of a rideshare program. So kind of like how some places have the bike share and other places have the scooter share, you would basically have these and you would have some sort of app associated with it. Maybe you pay, I don't know, a yearly fee for the app. And you have unlimited access to these cars as long as you can find them. And then, of course, you have the trackers. And maybe if someone tries to take the microcar outside of the boundaries, it just automatically shuts off. Something like that. I think that would be really nice. And from there, you would obviously be able to fit a lot more of those microcars on the conventional roads than you would conventional cars, which should theoretically appease whatever traffic you do have in the Netherlands, which doesn't seem like you have nearly as much as in American cities. But I think that's something that Dutch cities should definitely explore.